All right, we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. It is 2:31 p.m. on this June 8th, 2017, and I love that Craig apparently hates doing my public involvement announcement enough for me that he has now added it to the agenda. So I can actually read this myself.
That's Jamie.
Jamie likes my voice, everybody. So as all AMATS meetings, committee meetings are open to the public, and the public is provided an opportunity to comment at each meeting. Business items are presented to the staff by staff or consultant. After the committee discusses the item, the public is then invited to formally comment. And I ask that if you are going to provide any testimony, please state your name for the record and spell it. You'd be amazed how hard it is sometimes to hear the recordings after and get it straight. So, all right, first item before us is, roll call. I almost forgot roll call. Have that in front of me. Doing good today. Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Lynn. Mr. Hanson.
Here.
Mr. Post.
Here.
Ms. Marmello is here. Ms. Buck. Present. Ms. Becker is here. I guess let the record show that Mr. Post is sitting in for Mr. Van Helle. Ms. Buck is actually our new member representing Division of Air Quality, correct? Welcome. This is your first meeting. And we do have quorum. I know you've come a couple times to make your introduction, but all right. Now the first item ahead of us is approval of the agenda.
So moved. Second.
So moved by Mr. Hanson, seconded by Mr. Lehman. Are there any opposed? Hearing none. The agenda is approved. We don't have any meeting minutes in front of us today. So right on to our action items. The first action item is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee appointments. Let the record show that Mr. Hassan has joined us. All right, I don't want to slaughter names. Is her name Bridget Paul or is it Polly?
Polly.
It is Polly, okay. And Steve and Michelle? Okay. Thank you.
And as far as I can see, neither one is in the room. So our Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee has seats, some public seats and some seats filling up specific organizations. In this case, we are looking to replace the person who held the environmental organization seat, Brendan Babb, who now works for the city and has 7 million things to do and doesn't have enough time to play with us. So Ms. Polly, who's with the Nature Conservancy and is invited by her pedestrian, is our suggestion, staff suggestion for replacing that seat. And the bicycle organization seat, in this case, is currently held by the person who, Wes, his last name, he runs Wes Hoskins, who runs, or is the executive director, chair, et cetera, of the bike Anchorage. And so Steve Shell is a member of that board and is the recommended person to fill that seat. We just had a BPAC committee meeting on Tuesday, and they were both in attendance and both sent in. Although neither one of them was an official member yet, so it's good to see that they're both there and willing to take the time in their evening to do that. And they both offered some good comments during the meeting. So, and I also pronounced her name incorrectly. That's always fun. But it is Bridget Polly and Steve Shell. So we're asking you to recommend approval of those 2 names to the policy committee.
Any questions?
You have their recommendation. I said that out.
Thank you for sending that.
Any questions from the committee? Hearing none, I'm going to open it for public comment. Is there any comments from the public at this time on this item? None at all. Hearing none, matter lies with the committee.
Move to recommend both of these to the policy committee for approval.
Second.
Also moved by Mr. Hanson and seconded by Mr. Cylinder. All right, are there any opposed? Hearing none, we recommend that approval of the policy committee. before us is item 5B. This is the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan initial screening criteria.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Vivian Underwood. I'm Senior Transportation Planner with AMATS, and I'm also with the Municipality of Anchorage. I've been asked to give a brief overview of this project at every meeting I have for the MTP. So just to bring everybody up to date, this is the 20-year plan that we do. We update it every 4 years in order to receive and expend federal funds for service transportation improvements. So the last one was done in 2035, and what we're doing is we're updating this document for anybody who's interested, who's not familiar. 2035 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So this is a graphic of our timeline here, and we started out with the public involvement plan, which is posted to the project web page. There's a fact sheet over here that has the project website for you. It's 2020mtp.com. It's a pretty good website too. I think you might like it. So we have our guiding principles on the website. We've just gotten our draft goals and objectives posted also. And they are draft through the entire project, all the way through to the public review draft. So anybody feel free to comment. So right now where we are is the issue identification and problem solving phase. We're doing something brand new this time that we've never ever done before in recent memory with the Metropolitan Transportation Plan, and that is, as part of the problem identification phase, we're including the public by doing a call for nominations for projects. This is way early in the process, but we do it for the Transportation Improvement Program, and you'll be seeing the criteria for that very soon. So we're doing it for the Metropolitan Transportation Plan to be more inclusive. So as part of that, the reason why you have this item before you, the initial screening criteria, is part of Technical Memorandum number 1B, which also happens to be on the agenda under 6B. We extracted a table from the draft Technical Memorandum 1B, which is the screening criteria, and the table that we put out for public review and comment is this table 2-2, the initial screening criteria. Now, you have seen this draft document since April. We brought the draft Tech Memo 1B to you. We had a work session on May 9th. We brought it to you for release of the criteria, the initial screening criteria only, on May 11th. They were put out for 2 weeks. We got a request to extend the deadline for a full 30 days, so it's put out till June 10th. This is a little cart before the horse, but we're asking today for conditional approval of the initial screening criteria pending future comments through the 10th. Then we will give you by email an additional comment response summary, and you can vote by email if you like. The comment response summary that is here, actually, we've already included a lot of the comments for administrative edits in the version that you see now. So we wanted to make it as clean as possible for you to review this document. We have had some comments, and they are reflected in this version you have, this color version, and the yellow highlights show the changes that we made. So basically, people wanted to see some definitions of some of the terms that were in here, and some of the criteria themselves. These criteria do harmonize with the goals and objectives, as you can see in Tech Memo 1B later in the first table. They're meant to be a high-level screening. We're not doing any screening out of options that at this level. And actually, many of the comments that we received have to do with the alternatives development, where we start looking at all the different options: transit, bike, ped, roads, and land use. So that's going to be the really interesting phase, when we start to put the pieces together and come up with some different scenarios and different mixes of different types of solutions for problems that we see. We're going to see the deficiency analysis later today too, that's going to help us with the problem identification. But that's just one step. We have a lot of work to do, we have a lot of things we're going to be doing, and this is just an initial first look at what are the kinds of projects that the public is interested in and that the public might like to see. So, if anybody has any questions, we did include comments received from the work session and at the last TAC meeting also in this. And I'd like to point out that one of the comments that Mr. Lindemuth, or I think, no, Cynthia Wentworth brought up was that Regional Connections needs to show that it's not just for roads. So we took out roads. It's now for all modes. And also system connectivity, we changed that to be for all modes. And I think that resonates with the public. We want to make sure that we are not just looking at roads for improvements. Yes.
Question real quick. None of these will be weighted, is that correct?
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
Yes.
And number two, the suspense date that we expect the digital vote to occur, is that at the end of June?
No, it'll probably be June 13th, June 12th or 13th. It's going to, as soon as I can get it done. June 12th or 13th.
So that's pending in the comment period.
Yes. That's a very good point that you brought up, is we haven't weighted our goals, we haven't weighted our objectives, and we haven't weighted our screening criteria. They're only weighted to the extent that they get a certain amount of points, but the points do not vary by the criteria. So pretty much everything's equal.
Thank you.
So we're asking for your approval to move forward with this so that we can create the call for nominations form using these criteria. The call for nominations will start on June 14th, which is pretty close. That's the start of our first public involvement meeting on June 14th in Anchorage. And then we have a second public involvement meeting in Eagle River on June 15th. So this is all part of our public outreach.
Any other questions?
Question?
Mr. Lindemuth, that's all I'm saying first.
Oh,
Yeah.
Two things. First, I like a lot of the improvements that were made to this table. Thank you. But one thing I think, if I'm reading this correctly, I'm a little concerned about, and it's just actually operational improvements under -2.4. It says worsen traffic operations. One of the concerns I want to make sure gets weighted in here are conflicts. And as an example, buses stopping on northern lights that don't have bus pullouts, or any street for that matter that don't have bus pullouts, commercial drives. These are ones that I just get stuck by the bus, so I know there's others. We have situations like that where, I think projects need to consider, if we've got an area that, for instance, is heavily congested but maybe doesn't meet a threshold, but the buses are constantly getting hung up in it, that's an issue. I know we block crossings during opportune times of the day, trying to carry out our charge. And I think it comes under operational improvements, but the word traffic in there seems to sort of limit it to, again, just roads, not looking necessarily the conflicts between the modes themselves.
Okay, so what would you like us to do?
Probably just strike traffic.
That's our standard way of doing it.
Well, to me, that's the easiest way to do it.
Sorry.
Because I don't necessarily have anything other than what's on this chart, but, just trying to find a way to take that into account.
Thank you, that's a good comment.
That's all I have. But,
Ms. Fox?
So for the level of environmental impacts, the footnote number 2, I'd like to ask that you include air quality and that considered factors.
Yes, we absolutely do that, thank you. I'd like to on the comment response summary, some of the language from the definition provided for number 5, for economic benefits on page 2 is complete on this form that was put out for public review and comments. But for some reason, some of the language was cut off on the comment response summary. but the information that we provided to the public was complete. We did get some additional comments today. One person had some very detailed comments on the criteria, and we didn't have time to we're intending to bring that to you when we do the next comment response summary. Some people want the time period extended for the review for these criteria. I would just like to let you all know that if you choose to do that, it will impact the schedule for the project, the overall project. As it is, we are pretty pressed to the wall to get to our goal of having a document by November of 2019, which is only about 18 months, really. We have to hustle to get this done. If you all want to do that, we can do that, but we wanted to do the call for nominations in conjunction with the public meetings. It's just a nice time to do it, get all of it done together, and it's not the last time that the public can weigh in on the projects. And I just want to stress that for anybody who's here who doesn't understand that the alternatives development is actually where we get into the really interesting conversation of what are we going to do? How much transit? How, you know?
Also, just to clarify, this is not actually what it's going to be used to rank projects, correct? Or is this what being used?
This is the first phase. And actually, I suppose you could call this the fatal flaw screening that we eliminated from Tech Memo 1B. We felt that was too subjective. This is a little more objective way to do that. And the idea is if there's something that is just outrageous, something that just doesn't
Well, I think the fear from some people is they're looking at this because we are assigning scores, because we have a -2, a +1, a +2. They're thinking this is how the final project list is going to be ranked overall. And that's where some of the concern is coming with not having the opportunity to review this. So, I mean, I know that within Tech Memo 1B, there are other criteria that is going to be considered when we're looking at actual ranking of projects. So, that just needs to be clearly communicated. I think, once again, just to make sure that people understand that this is, like you said, it's initial screening.
Yes, it is initial screening, and we don't, as of yet, have a threshold
Yeah.
for what we will consider or we won't consider.
Yeah.
It's just a way for us to sort of sort things out with public input.
Yes. So one minor comment too, when you say the economic benefits and you have the footnote and the footnote breaks between 2 pages.
Yes.
If you could just put economic benefit on the next page, so that way the economic benefit in the table and the footnote are in entirety on a similar page.
It's a good
I think
idea.
it makes it easier to read.
It is in the tech memo. It just was not done.
Okay, that's
Sorry
fine.
about that.
I found it. I mean, I didn't follow along. Hey, at least you have references for footnotes. I love when I read reports that have footnotes, and then I can never find the footnotes. Are there other questions or comments from the committee? Mr. Brown?
Just real quick on the economic benefits, most of the criteria, no changes associated with the neutrals criteria, but on the economic benefit, the no change is in 4. So, you see that at the bottom of the table? So I guess the question is, if there are actions we would be considering that would have a negative economic benefit, would that be
Yeah, most of the others do have an option for negative impacts.
Yes, I was just wondering, if the way you spread out the descriptions of what's for neutral, fair, and good, that's the one criteria that seems to have shifted to the left.
So I'd like to ask the committee to consider a motion to amend that.
So, yeah, I guess maybe have a discussion on the manager. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yes, I hear what you're saying. When we make the motion, because most of the rest of them is you have a negative if it worsens, if it reduces, if
Right.
it negatively impacts. The question is whether or not we want to change this to say the negative, it means that it has a
Detrimental.
detrimental, like, a negative impact to economics, and then perhaps the neutral would be none to
None.
minimal, and then moderate significant.
questions or comments from the committee?
And I'd like to open this for public comment at this time. Is there anybody that has any questions or comments from the audience? Anybody? No surprise. Big deal. Once, gone twice? All right, the matter relies on the committee.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
May I just add one more thing? Another kind of screening that we're going to do is during the fiscal analysis. So people have asked, are you going to do a cost-benefit analysis? Well, we don't do that up front, but we do that with the fiscal analysis. So some projects at that time, too, may fall out because they're just not going to be pencil out.
They cannot be
$1
fiscally
billion.
constrained. Well, they cannot be fiscally constrained with no funds.
Exactly, yes. But I'd also like to point, excuse, yes.
Question, where is that fiscal analysis on the?
It is, it should be over here, cost. This is where we do the fiscal analysis. Well, actually, between here and here with the preferred alternative. Sort of do that hand in hand.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
A lot further along than that.
I'd like to say one more thing. We do have the option of including descriptive projects, or not specific projects, but concepts or ideas that maybe are not being put forward in our list of projects that are to be approved and that will be in the fiscal analysis. For example, commuter rail. We've always had in our MTP a text section describing the relative benefits of commuter rail, and the fact that we ought to continue studying it. But it's not, it hasn't been a specific project that we've included. But we do want to include that. We have a text for other things too. But those would only come forward when a specific project is ready to be funded. Is that clear? Do you all understand? You're looking at me, Dave. Mr. Post.
No, I guess I don't understand. You're saying that you would go ahead and explicitly want to evaluate the commuter rail as a standalone project?
No,
Am I right?
no, we would just include, like, in the 2035 MTP, there are several places where commuter rail is considered a part of the Glen Highway Plan. There's a, as a concept, at the concept phase only. But, so it's not part of our fiscal constraint analysis, however, because we wouldn't, unless we get a project that's clearly defined and has a funding source, we wouldn't put it in our fiscal constraint analysis.
Do we have a motion?
To approve?
Per the memo?
For the memo.
Okay. Do I have a second?
Yeah, second. Okay, thank you.
Well, we can do a.
That amendment comes after.
After public comment.
So you guys are signing. Mr. Hanson? Okay. There were a couple, so we're being asked, the reason why I said per the memo is just because we're being asked to conditionally approve the follow-up approval via email, so it's just trying to, that way we're not saying that we're just approving it right now. That's more my thing, so do we have a friendly amendment?
Okay, I will move to,
I guess, well, we have a motion in a second. We can have them. We can do the amendment now?
Yeah.
Okay.
so I'll move to amend the economic benefits line to, under -2, say detrimental economic benefits. Then slide the other three over and get rid of significant benefits. Or say moderate to significant benefits, whatever pleases Mr. Young.
Semantics, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Second.
All right, so that moved by Mr. Lagoon, second by Mr. Hanson. Are there any opposed to that amendment? Okay, so just to clarify, we're saying that in the -2 core column, it would say like a detrimental economic benefit, or I don't know, I guess. I'd say negative, yeah. To say detrimental to me seems very extreme, but I don't know. who wants-
Onerous?
Yeah.
Wicked evil.
Yeah.
But negative economic benefit, and then, and is neutral, and no, on the fair, you were saying minimal, and then on the good, have it be moderate to significant?
Yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair, too, on the air quality ad and the traffic deletion, are those amendment requirements as well?
I don't know.
I beg your pardon?
Those minor changes to the adding air quality to the footnote and removing traffic.
Oh,
from
I think we should include those in a motion.
the motion.
Yeah.
Okay.
So why don't we add those as part of the amendment? Or would that be separate?
You can do a separate amendment.
Separate.
Well, hold on, we've already done,
Okay.
we've done the motion, the second. I haven't asked if everybody's opposed, we already did that. Did I ask?
So you
if
want to
any-
do the amendment? Or
What?
do we
We
do
gotta
that?
vote on the first.
I didn't ask if anybody was opposed, all right. So we have, if you still want to, Brian, if you want to still modify your amendment further?
Can I accept it as a friendly amendment? No, that way we don't-
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay.
Whatever
Friendly
you said.
amendment. All right, so are there any opposed to the amendment with the friendly amendment? All right, very good. We're all feeling friendly.
It's throwing up over the side of his casket.
Those are great joys of my job. All right, now we're back to the original motion then, of saying we're conditionally approving this criteria. It was moved by Mr. Hassan, seconded by Mr. Hanson. Are there any opposed to the conditional approval with the amendments? All right, hearing none, the main motion is approved as amended. Thank you very much. All right, next item before us is item 6A, the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan Deficiency Analysis.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry, you're going to get tired of me today. So as I just mentioned, the deficiency analysis is part of the problem identification. And we have our consultants on the line, HDR, we have John McPherson and Joel Friedman, who worked on the model. Now, I'd like to point out that this step of the deficiency analysis uses the transportation model that was already approved for use with this MTP update. And that included the documentation on socioeconomic assumptions and the model itself, model development, and the calibration and validation, and all of those parameters, the traffic analysis zone, size, all of that. All of the details have already been approved, and those documents are available for view on the website in the project library under technical documents. So I just want to stress that this is our first step, very first baby step at looking at deficiencies. And it is admittedly road-centric. I don't want everybody to freak out about that. It is road-centric. We always do this. You will see a map with red, orange, and yellow lines on it that will show that, it will talk about just the level of service. We're going to talk about what that means and how we want to deal with that at the public meeting and with you all. We're not going to just assume that we're going to create a list of road projects to address all of those deficiencies. I just wanted to put everybody at ease about that. So it's one way to look at it. So I'm going to turn this over now to Joel to give his presentation. And we are not asking for your approval of this information yet. What we intend to do is take the information that's presented in this PowerPoint that you're going to see to the public meeting on the 14th and the 15th, and then bring feedback to you from that. And then you will see a document, a written document of the deficiency analysis for your review and approval. So that's maybe a little different from the way we've done things in the past, but based on the feedback that we've gotten from the public, we think that's a defensible way to do this. And
So we're gonna need to move.
yes.
If we can ever get working.
Shift to the side.
You should check here.
This was the menu. Yeah, this was the menu.
Let's spin it. This is actually pretty.
Hold on a second, we're trying to get the projector to show, we're having issues with it. On this? I mean. Normally this is supposed to work if I just touch it, but, how today is.
I wonder if you just like try restarting it
Hold on, we're trying to reset that.
Did you change the input?
You can't get it to change, there's no like option for connect your computer input.
to have a dual projector.
Technology used during the Clintons.
Hey, they got a new remote. It works and you don't have to like destroy it.
Okay.
Oh, good. Now you're gonna see they
I know, until it stops, it can't turn on. Pull down and start up. So I don't know if there's something else we want to move on to while we're trying to get this fixed.
What's that?
We can try and do hand puppets. No, I will fall. Well, that'll be funny.
I tried to volunteer once to do a presentation to IT about the traffic.
Yeah, I know, it's a great term.
Actually, we rented from jail properties. It's our land, but not our real land.
No, that was,
I do not make IT in
Where's that one?
Gotta look.
nobody wants to be called. That's terrible. It's like completely unprofessional, but kind of the way it is. It's like very funny.
No, actually.
You know, I tried.
You guys have to.
See if I get a hold of it.
We had that same concern. I mean, we were.
Oh.
frankly, H2.
There's only one tall enough, sorry. If there's an input.
There's a video. Are they gonna have?
Try that.
Fake already had that level of discussion there. at H2.
No, we have to call.
From my understanding of the talk, because I did not have that.
Well, I guess.
I thought it was condoms factory, I'm not sure.
There's a computer brothers.
Oh.
Yeah, it's Danny.
HWA backing.
Computer one. There we go. Hooray! All person help.
Bart's good story.
Did you hear that, Barbara? She said you were good for a lot of things.
Not just for being called.
Sucking up.
I'll take what you guys.
That's the only word I get frustrated about.
So Vivian, did you want to?
No, we fixed our technical difficulties, so take it away.
Okay, you're ready. All right. All right, well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to present where we're at with system deficiency analysis. My name is Joel Friedman. I'm RSG based on the Oregon office. I'm going to cover a few things today, quickly, since we only have about 20 minutes for the presentation.
Joel, can you talk up a little bit?
How's this? Is this any better?
Much better.
Okay, I'm gonna move my microphone a little closer. I'm gonna go over quickly the overview of the travel models that we're using for this portion of the system deficiency analysis. I'm gonna talk through the land use inputs that we prepared. Then I'll go over the network that we've built to describe what we call existing plus committed conditions, and I'll talk through what that means. And then I'll share some results of the analysis and open up the presentation for discussion. So quickly about the travel model. The travel model that's been used is the new model. Some of you may remember I was in Anchorage about a year and a half ago, I'd say, giving a presentation on the model. It was delivered in 2015. It covers the entire region, including the Matsu borough, although it doesn't have as much detail spatially or in terms of the network in the borough as it does in the municipality. The model has a number of enhancements over the previous travel model that was used for the 2035 MTP. There's spatial and network enhancements. The model has increased sensitivities to inputs, including transit and land use form, and it has been implemented in a user-friendly implementation. It was calibrated and validated to the 2013 base year, which is the same year that we collected a number of data sets for, that we calibrated and validated the model to, which I'll describe in a sec. So a lot of the comparisons you'll see later on in the presentation compare future forecasts back to that 2013 base year, because that's the year that we have the most recent data for. And it includes the initially delivered model includes land use forecasts for 2028 to 2040. And we performed some sensitivity testing as part of the model development project to ensure that the model was responding reasonably to its inputs. The model was calibrated and validated to the data sets shown in this slide, including a household travel survey, onboard survey data, transit onboard survey data, a Bluetooth OD survey. It takes advantage of truck GPS data from the American Transportation Research Institute for commercial vehicle movements, uses American Community Survey census data for a lot of the socioeconomic inputs to the model, relies on land use data and consistent with the AMATS land use plans, as well as data sets that were obtained from the Alaska Department of Workforce and Labor Development. It was calibrated and validated to traffic counts and transit boarding, and relies on a number of other assorted data sets. This slide just shows the spatial resolution of the model and what are called, the regions divided into what are called transportation analysis zones, or TAZs. They're about the size of census block groups. And as you can see, there's more detail in Anchorage than outside Anchorage proper. The model has 7 trip purposes, 4 income categories, 3 auto-sufficiency groups, and 3 time periods. So these are all the travel market segments that we can use to summarize model output. I mentioned that we have a commercial vehicle model. It's based on the ATRI GPS data. We have a visitor trip purpose. It's based on hotel room inventory and small number of household visitors. Airport trips that are based on enplanements and distributed to hotels and households, and external trip tables based on our Bluetooth data. And we have documentation on the model that describes the model form, calibration, and validation that's being posted to the AMATS website, I think, as we speak. So that should be available in case you're interested in downloading it. Really quick, this just shows how we're matching traffic counts and transit boardings. The traffic count validation meets all FHWA standards on matching counts in terms of better accuracy as the observed flow increases. The R squared is quite high, 0.87. And this just shows some of the model outputs. After you run the model, you get these HTML files that can be opened with a web browser, and they have a number of summaries in it. It's relatively straightforward to pull data out of the model and create comparisons of model results for performance indicators. Okay, moving on to future land use. We're using essentially the same land use forecast that we developed as part of the model development project as recommended by a policy committee resolution. And these are Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development household employment forecasts for 2028 and 2040, with a couple small exceptions. One is that the municipality of Anchorage recently updated their land use plan. And so we wanted to make sure that our household growth rates and forecasts were consistent with that most recent municipality land use plan. So we worked closely with the planning department to get their most recent set of inputs and incorporated them into our 2040 forecast and 2028 forecast. And then another small difference is that for the Matsu borough, we wanted to develop a land use forecast that was not reliant on the assumption that the Connect Arm crossing would be built for all of our system deficiency analyses. So we worked closely with the borough to adopt the transportation plan forecast growth forecast that they recently developed for their transportation plan. We kept the same household and employment control totals in the borough, but we reallocated population or households and employment for 2040 according to their forecast in coordination with the borough. And then one other small change from what we developed as part of the model development project is we wanted to use a 2030 year as a midpoint between our base year and our future year forecast. So we developed a 2030 land use scenario by interpolating between 2028 and 2040, just assuming a constant growth rate by year. So this slide just describes in a little bit more detail how we adopted the MAP 2 boroughs without kindergarten crossing forecast, basically just to take the percent change in households and employment by TAZ in their forecast and apply that to our base year number. And you know, the point of this is that if the kindergarten crossing isn't built, there's likely going to be less development, less household and employment development in the Point McKenzie area. And so we wanted to take that into account in our treatment of the MAP 2 borough land use assumptions. And so it has the desired effect of, in the without kindergarten crossing land use scenario, shifting that growth out of Point McKenzie into the rest of MAP 2 borough and Palmer. A couple of maps real quick just showing changes in households from 2013 to 2040. This shows the change in households in absolute numbers. You know, the darker zones are greater changes in households, lighter zones are lower changes. The blue zones are zones that lose households. There aren't many of them, and the ones that do lose households, presumably due to redevelopment of the zone, aren't losing very many households. The maximum is only 15. And I would note here that there is no with or without kindergarten crossing forecast for the municipality. It's just one land use forecast. But this was reviewed with the planning department. It's consistent with their growth assumptions. This shows the increase in households in the Chugach Eagle River area. As you can see, there's a lot of growth forecasted for that region. And here is the slide showing change in households in the rest of the MAP 2 borough in the without kindergarten crossing land use scenario. And the next set of slides show change in employment. You can see there's a lot of employment forecasted in the central part of the city, along the Seward Highway and so forth. And for Chugach Eagle River, and then from that to borough. And this slide just shows the change in households by area from 2013 to 2030 and 2040 in the with kindergarten crossing forecast and the without kindergarten crossing forecast. And you can see for Anchorage Bowl and Chugach Eagle River, the changes in households are the same in with and without kindergarten crossing. But for the east part of MAP 2 borough, west part of MAP 2 borough, and central MAP 2 borough, they're a bit different because of the shifts due to the kindergarten crossing. And this shows total employment by area forecasted in 2030 and 2040. I know this is a lot of information to throw at you, and I apologize. This will be in a technical memo that you will have access to, and we'll look for comments. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about our existing plus committed networks. So the base year of the model, as I mentioned, is 2013. That is the year that we have more or less current population and employment estimates for, socioeconomic inputs to the model, and traffic counts and survey data to calibrate and validate the model to. For the purposes of a system deficiency analysis, we want to explore network performance in the future given the construction of all of the projects that are currently in the committed funding pipeline that either have been built since 2013 or will be built before the future build years for 2030 and 2040. Now, there's, probably a number of projects, safety type projects, big operational changes that the model doesn't consider. So those two things the model and aren't going to be in the model network. But projects like capacity increases, road extensions, presence of medians, and some other network characteristics, those are projects that we want to put into the model network. And the transit system changes that are proposed to go into effect, I suppose, in the fall of this year, those changes were also implemented and are reflected in the 2030 and 2040 networks. So you can think of these networks as baseline networks. They're the networks that only include the projects that have already been approved for construction, and are in large part, a number of them are already being either constructed or are being constructed. These are not any projects that are more sort of planning type projects that we'll be studying as part of the alternative analysis. So this is a list of the projects in the municipality that are existing plus committed, projects that have been built or will be built in the next few years. And these are the projects that are in the Matsu Borough. And we work closely with Matsu Borough staff to develop this project list based on their expectations for what will be constructed. And here you see a map of the 2013 transit system on the left and the future transit system on the right. And the lines are colored by their headway. The routes are colored by their headway. So lower headways means more frequent service at the time between bus arrivals. In 2013, the headways were 30 to 60 minutes, but there are more streets covered. The proposed new transit system has somewhat less coverage in terms of space, but much better headways on key routes. So now you see some green lines where the routes are running at 15 and 20-minute headways. Okay. So all this data then, this new land use data and the network data is input to the model, and then we can run the model for 2030 and 2040 to understand what the travel patterns would look like based on a sort of a future that doesn't assume any planning projects will be constructed, only the existing plus committed system. And we can compare that to today, or to 2013, to see how travel patterns and congestion change in the future. We can also use those 2030 and 2040 forecasts as a baseline for comparing our future year alternative scenarios. So once we have gone through the screening criteria on all the future projects, and we've developed lists of future projects to program into the networks, we can then run them through the model and see how they perform compared to our baseline for the same year. So the results I'm going to show now are from the 2030 and 2040 model runs, which include the existing plus committed project list, and with the without Kinnick Arm Crossing land use forecast. Since Kinnick Arm Crossing is part of the existing plus committed project list. So before I show the plots, I wanted to quickly review definitions of level of service. Specifically, we define level of service in 6 categories ranging from A through F, and this describes essentially congestion on the road network. So where level of A is free flow conditions, and level of F is to the point where congestion is overwhelming the system. And the flow is very, very unstable or stopped. And these things are measured in terms of what we call volume to capacity ratio. So each road segment is coded with a capacity that's based on the number of lanes and the intersection control. And the assignment results tells us the estimated volume on the link, and we divide the volume by the capacity and we get a ratio. And if volume exceeds capacity, we're at LOSF. So it's for traffic engineers, engineering standards, it's a fairly simplistic representation of level of service, but it really gets at, where we expect congestion to be in the future. So a couple of side-by-side comparisons here. This one obviously focusing on the municipality. On the left, we see the volume to capacity or level of service analysis for 2013, the year that we calibrated and validated the model for. And on the right, we see the projected level of service for 2040 using the existing plus committed network and the 2040 assumed land use. And as you can see, congestion worsens. It worsens around where we have, high growth areas and high household and employment growth areas, and where we don't have any capacity enhancement projects in the existing plus committed network. You can compare these maps to, if you look at the 2025 MCP and the 2035 MCP, they were referred to as total daily performance. That's how they're labeled in those documents. We're trying to be a little bit more specific in this plan. So what we're really showing is the peak period level of service. So that is looking across the AM peak period and the PM peak period, or congested times of day. Whichever period is more congested, that's how we're showing the level of service. So if the inbound direction is more congested in the AM and the PM, and the outbound direction is more congested in the PM, then we would show both of those levels of service on the same link. Again, as you move out of Anchorage proper, and you can see that on the Glen Highway, the congestion is growing significantly, predicted to grow significantly in the peak period. Due largely to the household employment growth in the Chugiak Eagle River area. Lori, I don't know if you're there, you want to talk through the next couple of maps. These are comparing the 2025 MTP existing plus committed comparison to the 2040 comparison.
Sure. Basically, these maps are representing the results of all the improvements that we've made over the past several years. And as you can see, but unfortunately, I don't think any of us can actually read this. But you'll get a copy of it. And we can see how there has been improvements throughout town, specifically the New Seward Highway is one area that's definitely had improvements. There's all the recent construction. Other areas that we've seen, over on the east side, and then some of the other arterials throughout kind of in that area.
Yeah, and I should mention too, some of these lines here on the maps on the right, the new maps, they're showing up as black, and that's only because the flow on the line is so low. You know, the amount of estimated vehicles on the link is relatively low. So it's just not thick enough to see the actual level of service, but I suspect that most of these links are in LOS A or B. There's not a problem because the flow is so low. So where you see black, probably there's very little congestion, except maybe, you know, at intersections. This one shows the 2035 MTP existing plus committed compared to 2040.
And here we see a pretty similar pattern where we can see that there have been some improvements in the congestion on the areas that we've made some recent construction projects, but there are some areas that were a problem then and are still a problem now. You know, kind of the UMed, that Northern Lights accessing UMed, still a problem. You know, some sections along Tudor, you know, those are actually expected to get worse. You know, Muldoon expected to get worse. So, you know, we've made some progress, but population has continued to grow, development has continued to happen, and we're seeing that reflected in these patterns.
Okay, moving on. Another key output from the model is vehicle hours of delay. So this looks at by facility, how many vehicles and how much time being spent compared to free flow conditions. So if all vehicles were traveling in free flow conditions, it would be vehicle hours of delay. Right? Because congestion is increasing, vehicles are traveling slower than free flow conditions, and therefore, you know, vehicle hours of delay increases. And you can see that for many facilities, we're looking at 50, 60, maybe even 100% increases in vehicle hours of delay from 2013 to 2040, about half that much from 2013 to 2030. And the exception to that is Seward Highway, where we have some improvements in the existing plus committed network. So actually the vehicle hours of delay is decreasing on Seward Highway due to, you know, good things that we're doing to improve travel times. And this plot just shows, as opposed to vehicle hours of delay, it shows level of service by miles of facility. It's maybe a little bit confusing here because we're looking at across all 3 time periods. So each road is essentially being counted 3 times. And it's focusing on LOSD, LOSE, and LOSF, so that's sort of the worst levels of service. And as you can see, we're getting we're getting increases in LOS, in centerline miles by LOSD, E, and F, with the biggest change occurring with streets with respect to LOSF, where we only have about 9 or 10 centerline miles at LOSF in 2013, and that increases to almost 35 miles in 2040. By the way, these summaries are looking only at the portion of the network in the municipality of Anchorage and Chugiak-Eagle River. They're not summarizing the portion of the network in the Mat-Su borough. We could do that, but we really want to focus on the portion of the network that we're planning for as part of the AMATS MTP update. And similarly here, we're showing vehicle miles of travel, how that increases over time. But you can see by the plot in the lower right, the per capita BMC is staying mostly constant. So it's really a function of household growth and employment growth in the region, rather than people, having to travel further per person. And in fact, there's a slight decrease, although if you look at the scale on this chart, we're only going from 12.4 miles per person to 11.9, so it's a pretty small decrease. And this is based on the AMATS portion of the network and the AMATS population. And here again, we're looking at total vehicle hours of travel and vehicle hours of delay only for the AMATS portion of the network, and you can see hours of delay is increasing from about 2,000 to almost 6,000, so somewhere around a 2.7 times increase in vehicle hours of delay going out to 2040. This just shows how average travel time and cost is staying pretty constant going into the future. So in terms of the amount of minutes that people are traveling per trip, and the amount of out-of-pocket costs, which includes gas and maintenance, transit fare, they're riding a bus, things are staying pretty constant in the model. One of the other things I'd like to point out about these plots is that we can break out low-income trips from all trips. So when we get into our alternatives analysis, we can look at equity impacts of different bundles of alternatives on low-income travelers versus all travelers. And this plot is showing the accessibility to transit by the transit headway. So in 2013, and we've got two charts. One is showing for low-income households. That's this one up in the upper left, and this one is total households. So again, for equity purposes, we can look at impacts for low-income households compared to total. And one of the things you can see very clearly here is that because there are no buses in 2013 operating in this 1 to 15 minute headway, there's no bar here. But in 2030 and 2040, all of a sudden you have 40% of low-income households and about 28% of all households in the high-frequency transit corridor. And this plot shows something similar for employment. And here we're just looking at total transit boardings, total daily transit boardings, and per capita transit boardings. Again, these summaries would show, well, if you look at the scale here, it's staying pretty constant, but we do see some slight increases in per capita transit boardings. But generally speaking, total transit boardings is tracking growth in households pretty closely. And again, for alternatives analysis, if we're testing transit project changes, then these things become important to look at. And I think this is my last. This is I think my last slide here, where I just summarize mode share. Again, very useful for looking at transit system improvements. Where in the base year, we had about 46% drive alone, 21% shared two. That's 2 people in the vehicle. 21% with 3 or more people in the vehicle. About 9% of the trips overall were walk, and 2% were bike, and about 1% are transit. And in the future, in the existing self-committed networks, we do see an increase in transit mode share of about 1.7%, a slight increase in non-motorized, and a slight decrease in auto travel. And you would expect that as congestion increases and due to land use changes, putting households and employment maybe closer together, and with the changes in transit frequency serving the high transit corridors, high frequency transit corridors, you would expect some changes in transit mode share. Okay, so now I'm not sure how much time we have, but I'll turn the rest of the presentation over to Lori.
Okay, we get the super quick edition. So can you skip ahead, Joel? One more. One more. Thank you. So just so everyone doesn't think we're all about roads, we actually are doing an efficiency analysis of the other modes as well. So we've looked at pedestrian, bike, transit, and freight. In some of the deficiencies we identified, pedestrian, we have incomplete pedestrian network. It doesn't all meet the ADA requirements. We've all seen sidewalks and trails where they put a utility pole and a mailbox and a garbage can there, which limits its useful area. And we've all seen the pictures of the snow, up to here on the sidewalks, limiting their usefulness. We also have problems with just people park cars and other things that block the sidewalks. And our development pattern just doesn't lend itself to walking. We put land uses very far apart from each other. Like I work in an office where really you can't walk anywhere for lunch. There's nowhere within a good radius of that. So that's why our development pattern kind of inhibits our ability to use the pedestrian system. So for more information on that, you can see the pedestrian plan. Next slide, please. We'll skip ahead, one more. So the bike system, we looked at that, and one of the issues that seems to be arising is the use of the separated lanes. Is that quite often they're only built on one side of the road, and so you have two-way traffic as well as other users all trying to share this pathway. And quite often when people exit the pathway, half of the cyclists are now facing the wrong direction, and cars aren't expecting them, so they create some conflicts there. Again, the facilities are used for temporary snow storage. There are safety issues in terms of, dust and gravel are left on there after the sanding operations. Tree roots grow up through that all kind of limit the usefulness of the bike system. We have gaps in the network. We have some of the infrastructure is several years old, decades old, so they don't meet the modern standards of what we want for, a good practice, a good safe bicycle network. In some places we have insufficient or improper signage. We have signs where there probably shouldn't be signs, other places where it should have signs encouraging bike use. We don't have them, leading to a little bit of confusion for the bicyclists. And then insufficient maintenance is just going through and making sure that everything is in good condition. Next slide, please. Right. We'll skip this one. One more. One more, please, Joel.
There might be a lag to the end of the presentation.
There was. Okay. Hey, back. There should be a transit slide.
Okay, this one.
It's showing as bicycle and vehicle collisions. We have looked at collisions.
There we go.
Perfect, thank you. You gotta love technology, right? So we did look at some of the transit issues, and I will say up front, several of these issues are being addressed by the restructuring that People Mover is implementing in October. So please consider that when you hear these. One issue of transit is just ridership versus coverage. With the same budget, you can't provide ridership everywhere for everybody. Is that trade-off? Low frequency of service. If the bus only comes once an hour, that affects people's ability to use the system. Its span of service, kind of how long is it operating? If I can take the bus to work, but I can't take it home again at night because I don't get off until 8, it limits its usefulness. Our development pattern, similar to pedestrian, it doesn't necessarily be conducive to transit service. We have a lot of different land uses scattered throughout the area, so we don't often get enough synergy going. We have circuitous routes. They don't always follow a straight line. A radial system, a lot of the transit have been focused downtown. So if you need to transfer, you've got to go all the way downtown to go somewhere else. We've had duplication of service, which is tied to the disconnected streets. If everything is going downtown and there's only a few roads going downtown, you end up with a lot of service on those couple of roads and not necessarily great service elsewhere. We have intersections that don't support transfers due to their unwelcome pedestrian environment. If you have a pedestrian that has to cross, 6 lanes of traffic plus turn lanes on an arterial where people are going 45 miles an hour, it can be a little intimidating. So it doesn't necessarily encourage those transfers that people need to make. And then sidewalk maintenance. People have to use the sidewalk or the trail to get to the bus stop. If they can't get to and from the stop, it could limit their transit service. Okay, Joel, looking for the freight slide. Perfect. So we also looked at freight. We recently updated the freight study. And some of the issues were the intersection and roadway geometry. A lot of the infrastructure was designed for when a 40-foot trailer was the standard. Now the 50-foot trailer is the standard. So sometimes trucks have problems with some of the turns. When there's medians, they have problem making turns. They have trouble accessing driveways just because their typical vehicle has changed. The aging port of Anchorage, it's over 50 years old, and that kind of impacts our system. Truck rail conflicts. We have the port on one side, the rest of Anchorage Bowl and the rail yards in between. So there's a lot of movement going through there as the rail tries to do its switching operations. So that can just create some conflicts for different users. And as well, we have some at-grade crossings that the train needs to use those crossings, so that can inhibit the freight ability to move around the system. We need improved connections. We have connections between the port, the airport, but those connections could be improved so that we have an even better connection. We have dispersed freight generating land uses and land use compatibility issues. We have pockets of industrial and commercial spread throughout Anchorage, but they're not necessarily have good access to the port, the airport, or the rail, which they need to get their goods in and out, or to other destinations throughout town. And we have a lack of redundancy. In a lot of cases, we have one route for freight to access the port, the rail yard, the airport, getting over from Anchorage Bowl to Eagle River. There's only one. So having that redundancy into the system so that freight can keep moving if something were to happen to an element. And with that, I will end the discussion of non-motorized deficiencies. Now we will open it up to questions.
I guess from the committee first, before the committee, any questions or comments for the consultants?
I have a question. I know it's outside the purview per what the consultant said, but of the traffic going to Eagle River, do we know the percentage that goes beyond Eagle River?
We could practice that in a couple different ways. It's not in the presentation, and I don't have that figure for you off the top of my head, but we could determine it.
I think it's something to watch.
Any other
I
questions?
agree. I think it would be a useful summary.
Any other questions or comments from the committee?
The average out-of-pocket cost slide, where you talked about the cost of transport. So over the time that you were looking at, did that cost change? Or if you look at the last 20 years, did it change? I can't tell from that side very well. Was there much change over the last 10 or 15 years to that?
I don't have that historical information. I can tell you that the numbers that are being used here are in constant dollars. And we're not assuming, for the purposes of the system deficiency analysis, we're not assuming any changes in, for example, gas prices or auto operating costs.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Lindenboom?
I had a question on your bicycle stuff.
Okay.
And this was brought up when the original Anchorage bicycle plan was done, but the plan, besides encouraging year-round biking, relies on both Chester and the Campbell Creek Trail for primary east-west access. But because they are under the purview of the Parks Department, they aren't plowed. And it wasn't addressed in the bike plan, but it needs to be addressed. Either you're gonna have to find a different way, or you're gonna have to find some way to make the skiers and the bikers happy at the same.
Right. Yeah, and you're right, those different user groups all trying to use the same facility.
You're right. Yeah, it's a conflict, but in this particular case, I think it's exacerbated by the fact that you've got two different, for lack of a better term, municipal stovepipes with two completely different missions.
Right. Great point. We'll look at that.
I don't think that's something you're gonna fix with this plan.
Well, if
It
it's
can
not
be
in a
a-
plan, I can guarantee it won't ever get fixed.
Can at least be identified in this and identified in the update to the bike wall, the combined non-motorized plan, when we're updating that.
Yeah, we can identify and document that and start that process.
Yeah, I don't know how to fix it, but.
We've been at least trying to quantify the commuting volume, because as we've been doing upgrades on Justin, Campbell, and the coastal, we've been putting in permanent counters where we can, so we can start quantifying the commuting traffic. Because before there was almost the assumption that those trails were being primarily used for recreation, and that's not the case. There is a very definitive, clear pattern of commuting for Monday through Friday, AM and PM. So, yeah.
No, they're getting heavily used, it's
Yeah.
just a very difficult to use in the winter.
Are there any questions or comments from the public at this time? All right, thank you very much. Or do we have a presentation for the next item as well? For tech member 1B?
Do you want to switch the agenda and let Joni go first, since you all are already seated this way?
Oh,
I mean, do you want?
do we need to make a,
It's informational.
Disconnect them.
I'm just switching users here. Just want to take a moment to get up and stretch or whatever.
so is this item 6C instead?
Thanks, Joel. We're gonna hang up now.
Yes.
Okay, so this is going to be the Spinard corridor plan update.
Bye.
Anybody opposed to reordering? No.
All right, thanks for your patience. I know you guys have been sitting for a while. Sorry, I didn't know it's gonna be like this many PowerPoints in a row for you today, but I'll be quick. This is just a very high-level overview of the Spinard Corridor Plan. Most of you know about the plan. It's started last year. And again, it's just very high level. And we have a public review draft that's going to be coming out in the next couple months, which will give you an opportunity to look in depth at the plan and provide comment feedback, and change stuff if you want to change stuff. So again, I'm Joni Willen with AMATS. I'm the bike ped coordinator for AMATS, and this plan is Anchorage's first attempt at a transportation oriented development plan, and it's our first sort of, we're hoping, catalyst plan to really combine looking at land use and how it integrates with transportation at the same time in one planning document. So this is a planning area, a Spinard area that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. Again, the main things that we're looking at here, we want to improve transit facilities and services along the corridor. We want to use this as an opportunity to create a safe bicycle and pedestrian network. There's a lot of bike and ped activity in the corridor, but not that great of infrastructure that's safe for folks. So that's a definite focus. Creating more walkable spaces and incorporating some mixed use where we can. Mixed use development has been shown to really help develop a transit-oriented district. So this is sort of our project funding timeline, and Last year, we kicked off the plan. Our lead consultant is Winter Company. They specialize in urban design and historic preservation, transportation-oriented development. We do have subs. CRW is a sub. Engineers, Kittleson Associates is a sub for us. Brooks and Associates also is local. Alta Planning and Design, they're bike and ped national experts. They are also on the team, as well as Urban Economics in Portland. They did our economic feasibility study. So this was sort of our timeline. As you can see, we started last year. We have a Spinard Advisory Committee that meets. We've had about 4 or 5 meetings so far with that committee. We had a bunch of public involvement events that I'll look at in just a sec that we did last summer. And then now we are sort of developing, we developed the concept report, which I'll show you as well. And our next step is to develop the public review draft, which should be done in a month or so, and then bring it to you all and our other AMATS committees for review. And then we're gonna have an open house and then start the plan adoption process. So just some highlights of last summer's activities. Thea Tobish is the long-range planning project manager, and I'm the AMATS project manager. So we attended a bunch of the food truck festival. It was really fun. We attended the farmers market several times. We had a booth with information. We had surveys and maps and everything. We had an organized bike ride that Bike Anchorage helped us with. We had over 60 people show up to that ride, so it was really well attended. It was really fun, and we had a beautiful night for it too, so that helped. And we had a couple of folks from the community that led the ride and gave history on the different areas that we biked through. This was a flyer. Is there a pointer on here? Yeah. This was our little postcard to invite people to our presentation or our public workshop that we had. We did do a survey. We got a lot of good feedback about bicycle and pedestrian and transit networks and how people felt about the community and whether or not they felt it was safe and what they thought could be improved. So again, over 500 people responded, which was awesome. Some of the main things that we heard, and we heard this throughout the process, but a lot at the workshop. So the neighborhood would love to see more shopping and grocery opportunities at key points along the corridor, especially in South Spinard. Fish Creek came up as a big item. A lot of people view it as a amenity that's not really being celebrated in the way that it should be. They also really are excited about the 3-lane project that's happening in Spinard in the north from Hillcrest to, where is it? It's Hillcrest to Minnesota?
No,
Sorry, Hillcrest.
Hillcrest to 30th.
Just south of Benton, yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. So they're super excited about that road project, and they'd like to see a project like that extended to the middle Spinard area. They're very concerned about some areas where they'd like to have better access crossing Minnesota to connect the east-west sides. So there were some safety concerns there. So it was there in a couple other sections that we made note of. And then they'd like to see more public and open spaces created through the planning process and development process. So the concept memo came out. This came out actually in April. And basically it's just a memo highlighting the major elements that will be in the public review draft that you will see in a month or so. So the sections in this concept memo included some overarching principles, which I'll show you, a framework which has a bunch of different sections and a framework map, some transportation concepts, a lot of key transit, bike, and ped network concepts, and then an economic section to look at feasibility of redevelopment. And then finally, we have a CDFI section that our urban economics analysis guide did for us, just showing us a bunch of different types of ways you can actually fund this development, which is of course on everyone's mind. So these are our overarching principles. So I know it's been a long day, so I won't read through all these, but you know, there are quite a few, obviously connecting Spinard to the greater Anchorage area, creating investment opportunities, safe bike ped network, transit, and increasing ridership. And we are very lucky the new transit plan actually increases headway times in the corridor to 15 minutes. So that's really going to help us. So all along the corridor, and of course, it's a direct link to the airport. So I think this will really help us catalyze the area as a transportation oriented district. So again, I'm not going to go through all these. But a couple of cool things about the framework part. I think this map illustrates how well Spenard is connected to the surrounding areas. I mean, it's really the center of so many things or on the way to so many things. So this map is just a really neat tool. I think it is showing not only to the neighborhoods and places, but also the corridors to get to different areas. And this is just another highlight from the framework. It's a vision diagram. It shows Spenard, so as part of the transit-oriented development, Spenard was broken down into 3 sections. So you've got a North Spenard, Central Spenard. It was called Middle Spenard, but then people thought that was too low. And then South Spenard. So anyways, and these are described in the concept memo as having different urban characteristics and how they should be developed within context of what's there existing now and what they could be in the future. So, and then this map also does a good job, I think, of highlighting some of the connections that the community really wanted. So you can see kind of what they're asking for here. The framework map has a bunch of cool urban design icons on it. And again, I'm not going to go through all these, but I think the gateways are pretty cool. So each of these little pink circles is a potential gateway into the community. Again, you've got your 3 different transit-oriented development districts. And this also, you can't really see it very well, but it also highlights a pretty cool primary and secondary bike ped network. That's just it's an initial draft, and like I said, our consultant experts are going to be fleshing that out in a lot more detail. So that's the framework map. It talks about expanding the transit hubs and different ways that you can do that. It recommends at least 1 transit hub in each of those districts, so one in the south, central, and north. And then it kind of recommends places where those might make sense. And then let's see, we've got a development of our bike and ped system, again, a primary and secondary network. And this section is really fleshed out with a bunch of different ideas. What's my next slide? Anyways, a bunch of different ideas about how you can create a better network with the existing street and street right-of-way that we have right now. This is an open space system. It basically just shows where are the key open space places that exist now. And you can sort of use those as a guide to when you're trying to develop a better bike and ped network, because a lot of times people are biking or walking from their neighborhood to a green space, or from green space to green space. So, or using their neighborhood park as a place to bike or walk to. So that really helps in developing that. So they developed this map to show those, which I thought was kind of neat. And then, I think this is the last one. So this is an example, our bike and ped specialist, Fred, with Alta Planning and Design, he developed all these scenarios. So one problem that exists in Spenard is that, like I mentioned, there's limited right-of-way, and so quite a few streets have only 30 feet to work with. So the challenge is, how do we provide a network that accommodates bicycles and pedestrians and vehicles all in that 30-foot right-of-way? So these are just, he did a bunch, but these are just showing 2 different examples. These are both in 30 feet. Right-of-way, one's got 2 sidewalks on either side. We've got the shared, which is, of course, isn't ideal. A shared use facility isn't ideal. It's nicer to have it separated, but if you can't, it still provides a network for people to get around. I was going to say something else there. I forgot. Okay, so then finally, it wraps up with challenges, it's still a concept report, wraps up with challenges and some implementation ideas, which will, of course, be much more fleshed out in the public review draft. But these are just some of the challenges. Again, in spite of these challenges, I think construction costs might be one of the more onerous ones, but Spinard has a lot of transit-oriented development or characteristics already happening. And a lot of other places, they've had to do all of these things that the Spinard area already has going on. So that's really encouraging. And then, so what's next? So we are going to release the public review draft. Not release it, we are going to take the finished copy and then start an internal review and then bring it to all the AMATS committees for your review. Of course, our advisory committee will be looking at it too. And then we'll take that back, edit and revise it based on your comments, and then we'll release it for public review. And then we'll have our open house. I think we're also going to do one more survey and maybe some more focus group meetings. We don't know exactly when those are yet. And then we're hoping to sort of start the plan adoption process in November, and we know that always takes a while. And for this plan, since it's joint AMATS and municipality of Anchorage, we are taking it through the policy committee, and then we're also going to take it through the assembly. So we've got double fun getting it through all those committees. So this is the planning website. If you want to go on there, there's a bunch of information on there, and then we are on Facebook. Do you guys have any questions? No? Right. Cool, thanks.
Thanks, Johnny. So, presentations, we're done. We're done with presentations. Okay, so the next item will be 6E, the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan Tech Memo 1B. Thank you.
And I did write down that let the record show that how our phone was
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. So for this item, we just have the tech memo screening. This is still draft, and our plan is to take it to the public, take the information in this document to the public at the public hearings in June, and bring it back to you and ask for your approval of this document in July. But in the meantime, I'd like you to really look at it and consider like table 2-3 and...
Vivian?
Yes?
We don't
So
have
this
it.
is something that was passed out before?
Excuse me. It was. You have seen this like twice before, but this is the latest version. It includes all the comments received to date from the work session and from the technical advisory committee meeting we had on the 9th and the 11th of May.
So
you-
it has been revised, updated.
It has been revised. So this is the latest, this is the latest version. No changes have been made. We would like your comments, your review of it, and your thoughtful consideration of the latter half of the document. So table 2-2
Vivian,
is...
we don't have a copy of it right now, is what I'm saying. It was not part of our packets. So, yeah.
I'm so sorry. I made copies.
At your desk?
I'm so sorry. I thought I was sure.
So I go back here.
I can run back and get them while you, if you need to go to the next item. I can do that. You can stay here. Pause. I don't know how that happened. I apologize.
That's right, anybody?
It's awkward.
No, let's do the obligation.
Want to do the obligation report?
Yeah.
That's always
Okay.
a good time.
Purchase order.
Except Craig left. Isn't he the
Craig
one?
left.
Yeah, so.
I can fill in for him really quickly, just so we move since it. Okay, hello everyone. Ariel Candela, AMATS planner at DOT. This is the sheet we're looking at right now. It is the second quarter AMATS obligation report for FY17. We're doing well. That's the big thing to kind of notice is huge. The first thing is the O'Malley Road reconstruction project. It went forward. It got obligated and is moving forward. Anyone who's been around town in the O'Malley area can see. So it's very exciting. There's not too much to report on. I do want to say that really quickly at the very end, you'll notice that there is a negative 6.45%, and we're supposed to be plus or minus 10% for this quarter. Basically what that's meaning is that we have some extra funding waiting to be obligated. There's been some non-motorized projects kind of being delayed. We're not losing money, we're not ruining anything. It needs a little additional time for right-of-way or environmental to kind of go through. So it's being delayed until 2018. So there's some extra money being freed up in 17. And so at the time of this report being done, we did not know what we were doing with that money. The hope is to keep it in the non-motorized category so we don't lose it to something else. So we will update you guys on what's happening with that at the next quarter once it's kind of figured out. I'm sorry I don't have the answers right now, but we're still moving forward. It's anticipated that everything will be obligated at the end of the year like it always is. I think that's about it. I don't know if you guys have any questions. Keep it short and sweet.
Any questions? Yes, I can ask, are there any questions or comments from the audience for Aaron? Thank you, Aaron. You're welcome. All right. Yeah, I know you did. All right, now we're back to Tech Memo 1B.
I apologize for the... Thank you. So this version does what you all asked us to do at the work session. For example, on page 4, we took out the fatal flaw screening, so now we just go for the call for nominations, and that's the step where we do the initial screening. Then we do the model run evaluations and the prioritization. That's a graphic that shows you the whole steps, the 3 different steps for screening. Table 2-1 is a comparison of the initial screening criteria with the proposed MTP goal. And that's important because we want to show traceability all the way through, that our criteria do relate and correlate with the goals and objectives, or the goals. So table 2-2 is initial screening criteria that's just approved for, yes, excuse me?
There's some changes that we just approved that need to be incorporated in this 2-2.
Yes, at the last meeting.
There will be.
Yeah, this is only informational. This will be brought
Okay.
before us for approval next month.
This is a revised draft. So this is addressing comments we received today. So the last table is, well, 2-4 is prioritization criteria for road projects, and then transit projects, and then non-motorized projects. So the last, skip 2-3, the model run evaluation criteria. I would especially like your help in helping us think through if we have selected the best criteria for the model run evaluations. And one thing I'd like you to notice that it talks about person trips in AMATS versus vehicle trips. There is an auto share, a transit share, a non-motorized share, but we're focusing on person trips, and that's a big change. So there's also vehicle miles traveled, vehicle hours traveled. Vehicle hours are fine. We just need to make sure that we have the appropriate criteria for the model runs. So, and the last 3 tables are prioritization. It's really for deciding whether things will go in the short term or the long term of the long-range transportation plan. So when we get to the evaluation of the alternative analysis, we'll want to talk about, are there other criteria perhaps that are measurable to evaluate those different alternatives? So, thank you very much. And if anybody has any questions.
Not specific to this, but I am curious, I apologize, I haven't visited the website, but from a comment standpoint, so once you're getting public comments, is it sort of being finalized in this format and then uploaded? Or is there an interactive methodology by which to, as comments come in, they're being made available to the public on the website so they can?
Well, that's a good, for this, we decided to share information in the tech memo at the public meetings. The public memo will be made available on the website, but for this one, we're not doing a specific public review and comment period. So people can make comments always through the link. There was a standing comment link.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Are there any questions or comments from the audience? Thank you for accommodating our shift in the agenda a little bit there. Are there any committee comments before we close it? I guess I have one comment. Today is the first public art light tour. That starts at the Anchorage Museum. They said they're having everybody meet. I think they've said they're not really going to start their bike ride until about 5:45-ish. They're going to be milling around, and then they're looking at 8 different pieces across the municipality. It sounds like you're starting at the Anchorage Museum and you're going to be finishing in Spinard. I think it's called the Anchorage Makers Place. What they said the name of the place is. I don't know if I said we're the Church of Love where they're doing.
It's 33rd Avenue behind the old Pepper.
Okay.
I've got one before you gavel out.
Oh no, if there's
Okay.
other committee comments. So yes, Jerry.
Dan, it was brought up, I just signed the notice to proceed for our longest running project. Spinard Road is starting Monday. Hillcrest to 30th Avenue, and Quack is our contractor. Like I said, and I'm glad to see that everybody's in favor of the 3-lane section, because that's what held it up for about 13 years.
You just had to wait for a lot of people to
Die off.
I was trying to put it nicely.
And we have several other projects turning in, Yosemite Drive, Campbell Airstrip Road, Dubin, and we're opening bids for our last phase of 100th Avenue tomorrow, hopefully. So I don't anticipate that getting open this year, but get a lot of work done.
And the nice thing about both Dubin and Turnigan is we're taking on Dubin right now, it has absolutely no pedestrian or bicycle facilities. And we're going to have 2. And then really Turnigan has kind of an on-street, off-street trail that turns into Fish Creek Park and everything. And
It's all part of Fish Creek Trail.
It's all part of Fish Creek Trail, but we're actually going to have a continuous trail on one side and a sidewalk on the other. And in-street shared facilities throughout the corridor. So, I mean, these aren't just road projects, so. Okay. Hal?
So, his hand's up.
No, you were next. You said that.
Okay. Next Wednesday evening, there'll be an open house in this room. It's for a $150 million mixed-use project. The project will involve a hotel, housing, grocery store, several other items. They've invited the 2 neighborhood groups, the university group and the immediate group, the Campbell Creek group. It's an open house, and it's very interesting. This could be a hub for the UMIT district, right out where we are.
So that's moving forward.
So the open house here is for the project, for those who don't know, it's this campus right out here where you have all the buses and the
Right.
motorcycle track and all that stuff.
And you'll see it in the news over the next 2 to 3 days.
Okay, Mr. Lindeman?
Just more of a question. I think it was 2 months ago, 2 meetings ago, we passed some sort of resolution or something like that, get some sort of forum together to discuss priorities in snow maintenance. But I never heard what happened to it after that. Did it happen? Is it scheduled? Is anyone?
I know it went to the policy committee meetings. I was looking, it was in March, I believe. I was looking at previous agendas, looking for other things.
We're just taking a few months to do some research on what some other cities are, how they're coordinating clarity. And we're hoping to schedule it probably for August, unless people kind of object to that timeframe with issuing or pending issues or whatever. So, but that was sort of our thinking. We're gonna do some research and then bring it forward.
Okay. You haven't missed it.
I was just wondering where that golf ball landed.
Are there any other comments for the good of the order?
Can I make one comment? Not a committee comment?
Not yet, public comments.
Like Aaron, my public or not?
We are not part of.
All right, fine, I'm on the public comments. Yes.
Sorry. I just wanted to remind the members about the work session we're going to have Tuesday, June 20th, 2 o'clock in this room at MTP 101. Kind of, you know, went past, started, but this would be kind of an opportunity to revisit some stuff and remind you of how everything fits into whatever we are doing.
A lot going on there.
Yes. Craig, through the chair, could you please make the announcement about Christopher Constance's request for the resolution?
I can. So Mr. Constant, who is, as you know, is a new assembly member and a member of the policy committee, has asked to, let me find his exact wording here. Misconstrue what he had to say here. I can figure out where it's going. He basically has asked us to look at, we have the plans to do the model runs, and the way it was written, I must have thrown it out. I had it right here. The way it was written was, you know, we'll do a model run with and without the Kinnicarn crossing, and he has suggested that there may be a possibility of not doing that model run without, there it is. I would like to request that AMATS issue a resolution before the TAC this month to forego utilizing the Kinnicarn Bridge for modeling data. With the governor's statements that the bridge is no longer on the agenda, the logical assumption is that the bridge will not be built in any capacity between now and 2040. As such, resources do not need to be spent modeling this. I would also like to request that AMATS include in that resolution the need to model highway to highway so we can see what the data suggests is the impact to the rest of Anchorage as a result of the highway to highway being built. And I said that we couldn't bring it up this month because we didn't have the 7-day notice for a business item. So he has requested that, and so imagine we can bring it up next month. The idea, I mean, we could do the model runs either way, however we want to do that, but I think he kind of wants to put a kind of a public statement that this is the will of this particular body. I know this is a technical committee versus a policy committee, and that's kind of a policy decision, but that's the discussion that we would like to have occur.
Can I ask a question? Are there some upcoming public meetings on the MTP as well?
If you look on the bottom of your agenda, thank you for pointing that out. The 2 public meetings, June 13th will be the Anchorage one, and that's at the Mountain View Library, 5:30 to 7:30, and the following day, June 14th, in Eagle River at their library there. There's a community room far other end of that building there. So same sort of time, but those are 2 public meetings on the MTV.
So we'll encourage folks to go to your open house if you encourage folks to come to our MTP meeting on that same night.
It's down to you, pal.
We got it, okay. I'll be at both.
I know that I saw the MTP notices on Facebook coming from the announcement page, so I know that those are being sent out, so, yeah. right, are there any other?
Add something to that? Sure. I just wanted to let people know that there will also be an online open house in conjunction with the public meeting that will run June 14th, I believe, to July 14th. So for people that are unable to attend the meetings in person, please invite them to attend the online open house.
And that also coincides, I mean, with the fact that that's when you're making, is that when you're making the calls for projects?
Exactly.
Okay.
Same timeframe.
A lot going on. Got it. All right. Busy summer. Yep. And I'm preparing for a wedding, not mine.
You have to get divorced for
No, I'm just the maid of honor in my fifth and last wedding. I'm going to be the maid of honor. I need to stop having so many friends. All right, any other comments for the good of the order? All right, thank you very much. We're finished at 4:27 p.m.